Right, well, at the top of the show, I did happen to mention that if anybody has any New Year's resolutions, perhaps they'd like to phone in. And, in fact, on the line we have John from Basingstoke. John, a regular caller to the show. Hello, John.
Hello, Mark. Yes, John Ashe with an E from Basingstoke, calling in as usual and eating nuts.
Eating what, sorry?
Nuts. Brazil nuts.
Brazil nuts. Nice. Okay.
Yes, for my lunch. My doctor said I shouldn't eat them, so I am.
Oh, okay. Well, let's not... Well, this is a hospital radio station, John, so let's not go there. Now...
Well, it's not a hospital, doctor.
Oh, okay.
No.
Okay. Now, John, it's 2024, in case it escaped your notice. How's it been treating you so far?
Well, no, it hasn't escaped my notice. I've been aware for some time that 2024 was arriving.
Yep.
That it's arrived. I suppose it's been treating me quite well. When I look out at the world and I see all the tragedies that are going on and I compare that with my life, I do think to myself, well, yes, I'm in a very good situation, really. Everyone complains about the little things in life, but to be quite honest, they pale into insignificance compared to the very big things that other people have to put up with, which is just appalling. So, yes, I'm feeling very positive, and that puts me in a very good mood to make a New Year's resolution, which of course I've already done. Well, actually, several New Year's resolutions.
Oh, right. And would you like to tell me and the listeners what they are, John?
Yes, I would.
Okay, over to you.
Right. Well, there are some that I don't want to mention because they're rather personal, but those that are less personal, I think I'm prepared to share. But I have a rather unconventional approach towards this business.
Right.
Of course, being somebody of a scientific background, as I think I've told you before, I used to be a quantity surveyor, and that has put me in a position of having studied scientific things to do with quantities, and so I tend to look at these issues in a very rational manner.
Right.
And so I look at the people around me who are very often making these New Year's resolutions about things that is very difficult to keep. So, they might say something like, well, I'm going to try to run 5 kilometres every week.
Right.
I'm having the couch potato right up to Christmas, got several more kilograms added through all these mince pies. And now on the 1st of January, that week, I'm going to run 5 kilometres. And I think to myself, well, that's not doable, is it? So it's much more sensible to choose something that's extremely doable. So that's what I do. I do doable things.
Okay. What sort of doable things have you resolved to do this year, John?
Well, again, I look at it very rationally, and I decide, well, I say to myself, well, what's the most doable thing that I can do? Because there are lots of doable things that aren't so doable. I mean, they're doable, but they're not easy to do, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a sort of continuum of doability. So if you go to the extreme of doability, then those are the easiest things to do, and therefore you're likely to keep them, and you won't be embarrassed, when you tell people.
Right. So
in conversation. So for example, one of the resolutions that I've adopted this year is to do something, or to not to do something that I don't do anyway.
Say again. It says not to do something you don't do anyway.
Yes, that's right. To refrain, because often it's refraining from things, isn't it? I gave the example of running, but 5 kilometres. But it can be things like, I'm not going to eat chocolate anymore, that sort of thing, for this whole year. Of course, people tend to do that for Lent, and I'll talk about Lent in a moment. But yes, so one of the things that I'm going to not do anymore is something I don't do anyway. So, for example, one thing is stealing traffic cones. I've never stolen a traffic cone in my life.
Right.
But I've decided this year that I'm going to resolve not to do so, not to steal any.
So
I'm pretty much guaranteed to keep that.
So you're going to continue. You're going to continue not stealing traffic cones.
I have resolved that I shall not steal any traffic cones.
Right.
For the whole year.
So that was a sort of
guaranteed to keep that. It'll be pretty easy as well.
So that was a sort of assumed thing you did previously, but now you're making it a very conscious decision not to.
As you could put it that way. Yes, I didn't really think about it before now, but now I think about it, well, certainly at the moment I'm talking to you. And generally, yes, I think to myself, gosh, there's some people who do that. Well, I'm not going to do that this year.
What if, say, it was very windy outside and a bit of your fence blew down and you wanted to stop traffic from going round the corner into it, and there was a traffic cone just lying around, perhaps being blown along by the wind? Would you think about taking that traffic cone and putting it somewhere visible to stop people from going into your fence?
I might do, but I don't think I would classify that as stealing, really.
Right.
It would be borrowing.
Okay.
So I have more in mind, where you go along the motorway and or a dual carriageway, and then the workmen have put out these cones along, and it says 50 miles an hour or whatever, and you're thinking, well, there's no reason for that. They're not doing anything here at all. You never see any works. But there seems to be a culture of putting cones out for the sake of it. But nevertheless, belong to the, the authorities, and so I wouldn't stop the car and, pick one of these up, stick it on my head, and dance around, and as teenagers tend to do. I would never do such a thing.
Right.
And I won't be doing it this year either.
Okay. Never rung the Cones hotline?
No, certainly not.
Right. What other resolutions have you got? Are they all sort of similar to that then, John? Sort of resolving not to do something you don't do anyway?
They are, actually, yes. Including the ones that the big maker.
So you're breaking...
Before, I'm not going to... It doesn't matter how much you try to talk me into it, Mark. I'm not going to talk about those, so don't even try.
Okay. John, just say that again. You broke up a bit.
Yes, they are all of that nature. I have a few more. So some of them, of course, as I said before, are of a personal nature, deeply personal, and I shan't be talking about those. It doesn't matter how much you try to persuade me to talk about those on air, I shall not be, so don't even start with that, Mark. But there is one more that perhaps I could share.
Right.
And that has to do with the weather.
Right.
Have you noticed in this country that people talk about the weather a lot?
I have. I mean, I do on my own show, actually. In fact, sometimes I look out of the window here at Valley Park Towers and comment on the weather, yes, whether it's raining or not.
Right, well, I don't talk about the weather precisely because so many people do, and I find it intensely boring. And that's another thing I shan't be doing this year. I've completely given up talking about the weather.
Right.
I mean, in a conscious sense. And I suggest that you do too, Mark. I think it's a little lazy of you to talk about the weather all the time on your show. There are lots of other things.
Well, I don't talk about it all the time, John. I mean, I do talk about other things as well, but I do sometimes comment on the weather. If it's particularly raining a lot or it's particularly hot, I might comment on that, perhaps. But you think that's...
Well, let's think this through. It's raining a lot. I mean, by and large, your listeners are going to be looking out the window saying, oh, it's raining a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's not really very helpful, is it? I mean, there might be some people who aren't, but by and large, people are. And I don't think it's that informative to people who are raining a lot, I mean, given that we're in this country, pretty much guaranteed to be raining a lot anyway.
I suppose...
So you might as well, save your breath and talk about something else instead, like traffic cones or something.
I suppose whether... Is it not the social thing where it's just sort of brings people together a bit to complain about something common when, as you say, there's so much going wrong in the world, sort of it draws us together, doesn't it, talking about something like that?
Well, I try to avoid talking about things that are common. I mean, I always consider myself to be a little above the common.
Right.
So it's, there are much more improving things, edifying things to talk about than weather, common things. Like, what's the latest, the latest ingredient in a hamburger down at McDonald's and things like that. I'm not really interested.
Right. So what would you talk about then? What would you talk about instead of the weather? What would you suggest we talk about? Or what would you...
Science. Is a good thing to talk about.
All right.
Yes. Or indeed, we're talking about keepable, doable New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing, I haven't really got to this yet, but the weather issue is broader than I indicated, because there's also the fact of watching the weather forecast on the television.
Right.
Which is another thing I try to avoid. In fact, I can't remember watching the weather forecast probably for about 40 years.
Okay.
Now, when I think back about 40 years ago, there was a man called John Catley. Do you remember? I think he was a weatherman. I
do remember. I think he had a little moustache, and he was slightly northern.
Yes, he was slightly northern. That was slightly disconcerting, but I like people to be fully northern.
Right.
But,
okay.
Yeah. And there was also a Michael Fish.
Yes.
I think they were contemporaneous, although I do believe that Michael Fish was a little older.
Right.
So I was aware of those two, and those two combined made me eventually, not exactly resolve, but made me think that I was wasting my time watching the weather forecast, because it was pretty much always the same. Sometimes raining, sometimes sunny. Sorry.
You're right, John. You're right, John. You're right, John.
Yes, I'm all right.
Was it remembering Fish and Ketley?
Well, no, sometimes it's, sunny, sometimes it's raining, sometimes it's snowing, sometimes it's hailing, sometimes it's doing, those things, perhaps all of those things in a day. And after a while, I realized that it was not very varied. What new information was I getting out of it? Not really anything new. I had understood it all, really, by the time I was, of my majority, as it were. And so I thought, well, I just can't be bothered. However, this year I've decided that I actually will resolve not to watch a weather forecast. Yes, or listen to it on the radio, which I think is essentially the same, although you don't use your eyes.
Would it not be, perhaps, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but perhaps say there was a storm coming, and the next day you were due to go and meet somebody somewhere, and there's a big storm, lots of rain and wind and hail, and they would advise people not to travel, but you didn't know that, and you went out and travelled and got stuck, and perhaps was in your car for several hours. In a traffic jam, would you not thought, gosh, I wish I'd listened to the weather forecast?
No, because I'd expect my friend to telephone me and tell me about the storm.
Right. Okay, so those are some resolutions. Any more resolutions that would interest our listeners that you're allowed to tell me?
Well, I'm allowed to tell you all of them, but some of them are rather, a little bit
okay.
too personal.
Give us a. Go on, John. Give us a taste of one of the personal ones.
I told you I'm a very happily married man. So is my wife, and we have a normal. I'd rather you didn't ask me about
right.
it.
No, I won't. I won't. I won't.
Yes?
I won't press you, John. I won't press you.
No, I think you pressed me far enough, really. And,
right. Okay.
As I say, there's nothing unusual about our relationship.
No, I wasn't suggesting there was.
No.
Okay.
It does touch on those sorts of matters, but those are private, really.
Right.
So
right. No. Okay.
Particularly wish to.
Okay. No, I was just making conversation. All right, John. Well, that's great to share those things. So it's basically not doing consciously.
Well, I didn't share them all.
No.
Those things, the things that I shared. Exactly. Yes, but I didn't share them all.
No.
I said there are some deeply personal.
Right.
That I don't. Yes.
Okay. So the weather, not talking about the weather, not sort of being aware of the forecast. Presume you are aware of the weather as it's happening around you, but you just don't want to talk about it or acknowledge it or know what's going to happen. Is that have I got that right?
Sorry, I'll have to ask that again because I've just texted my wife because I thought there was one thing perhaps I could mention, but she says no.
Oh.
No, I won't talk about that. Sorry, what was the question?
The question, John, was presumably you're aware of the weather as it's happening around you, but you don't want to acknowledge it or talk about it or find out what's going to happen weather-wise.
Well, I'm not against finding out, but in principle, if you remember, many years ago, people used to put a piece of seaweed outside their door.
Mm.
And if it would go limp, then that was a sign that it's going to rain.
Right.
And then if it rained afterwards, you would say, well, that with the use of that piece of seaweed, I have forecast that the weather has changed to a rainy state. So I'm not averse to doing that sort of thing.
What, leaving seaweed out?
Sorry?
You're not averse to leaving seaweed outside your door?
I'm not averse to that, no, but I am averse to watching it on the television or on the radio.
Right.
Because they're so boring. They always use the same words, the same gestures, and the same smiles, and it just becomes...
Yeah.
You get so distracted by all the peripheral matters that you can't even hear what they say. Sometimes people are so boring. They go on about things, and you think, I didn't pay attention to anything they said because they're so boring.
I must admit, I do like listening to Carol Kirkwood or watching her on the telly, but that's possibly not weather related. Let's leave it there, shall we, John?
I think so. That reminds me of some of the things that I don't wish to talk about.
Right, okay. Well, look, lovely to talk to you, John. You've told us about weather and about... what was the other thing you mentioned? I can't remember now.
Cones.
Pardon?
Yeah, traffic cones.
Traffic cones.
Traffic cones.
Anything else you'd like to leave us with as a resolution, just for our listeners to mull over, ponder over?
Well, there is one. It's a rather hypothetical one, because many, many years ago there used to be something called the speaking clock. Do you remember that? You used to be able to...
Yes, the speaking clock, I do. You remember? Yes, you used to dial a number, I can't remember what it was now, and it would... the time, sponsored by Accurist, is... And it would tell you the time, back before we had watches.
Right, indeed. Now, I don't know whether that service still exists. But I'm not interested to know, because if it does exist, then I'm never going to call that again.
Right.
If it doesn't exist,
Okay.
then it won't matter. So that's another one that's pretty easy for me to keep.
Yes. And when was the
So
last...
I'm guaranteed, whereas other people will say, oh dear, I had all these resolutions. I didn't keep any of them. I'm thinking, well, I'll be able to say, I had several New Year's resolutions, some of which I don't wish to divulge, and I've kept them all.
And is that, do you think, John...
One actually might be difficult.
Okay, so...
I can't go into that. But,
no, okay. Yeah. When was the last time you dialed the speaking clock then, John?
It was the 4th of August, 1987.
Right. So I guess that is quite an easy one to keep. I mean, is that... Do you think, though, again, playing devil's advocate, do you think that's the point of resolutions, that they're easy? Isn't it the point of a resolution that it should be slightly challenging and slightly hard to do?
Well, what's the point of having something that's challenging? I mean, what's the point in that? You said that is the point of it, but what would the point be in having something that's hard to keep, hard to do?
I suppose it's self-discipline.
Doing doable things is more doable, I think.
Self-discipline?
Well, I'm quite self-disciplined anyway. I don't need to train myself in self-discipline.
Okay. All right, John. Well, fascinating as always to hear your thoughts on the subject of the day. Do you have a record you'd like us to play on the virtual turntable?
Yes, please. Could you please find John Ketley as a weatherman? Now, I'm not sure, I think whether it was the Kinks or the Beatles, I'm not sure which group it was that did this, but I do remember there was a song called John Ketley as a weatherman, and I thought, well, obviously he is. Why do a song about it, you know? But I heard the song, quite liked it. I used to dance there as a young man.
Okay.
So that would be nice if you could find it. Was it the Beatles? I think it was, wasn't it? I think it might have been the Beatles.
John
or the Smiths.
Ketley is the weatherman.
I get those two quite confused.
You get the Beatles and the Smiths confused?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Yes. No, actually I don't. No.
Okay.
Come to think of it.
Okay. All right, well, we'll do that then. We'll have a look for that for you, John. Can't make any promises, but we'll have a look for that one for you. And if we find it, who would you like it to be played for? Who would you like to shout out for in 2024?
Yes, a shout-out for in 2024. Yes, indeed. Well, I think Maud is closer. Not exactly a rhyme, is it? But it's what's that word where it sounds like a rhyme, but it's not quite a rhyme?
Half rhyme?
It was popular. A half rhyme, but there's a fancier word for it. It was popularised in Educating Rita. I just can't remember it at the moment.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, Maud. I think that would be good. Shout out to Maud, please, and I think she would also appreciate this record, if you can find it.
Okay, well, we'll do our very best, John. Lovely to hear from you as ever, and hopefully many more calls to follow in 2024 from you.
Assonance.
Pardon?
Assonance. That's the word.
Oh,
that
right.
Was popularised.
Right.
Yes, in Educating Rita.
Okay, right. All right, well, lovely to speak to you, John, and speak to you again soon.
Yes, bye, great show. Good to speak to you again, Mark. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Cheerio, John.
Darren's back.